Welcome to the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. My name is Joel Silverberg. Appreciate you taking the time to visit the KIB podcast, whether you're doing so on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen. The SPHL season is officially underway. We had all 10 teams in action on Friday and Saturday, and we've got more games coming up this weekend. The Ice Bears get off to a loss. They turn their attention to the Roanoke Rail Yard Dawgs for their next 3 games. We'll talk to voice of the Rail Yard Dawgs, Mitch Stewart, about that later on in the show. And so we're excited to kind of see where the season goes from here. It's the first 2-game weekend of the year for pretty much everybody. Every team just played 1 game last week. The Ice Bears fall to Fayetteville on the road on Saturday. Roanoke fell to Huntsville at home on Friday. And now a rematch of last season's first round playoff series matchup will take place Friday in Knoxville, Saturday in Roanoke, and then next Friday back in Knoxville on Halloween. And it's great to be back in the regular season. And I thought we saw some pretty good hockey, some pretty good results. You saw Roanoke fall to Huntsville, as I mentioned, Knoxville dropping a 2-1 decision to Fayetteville. Pensacola outlasted Macon in a shootout. Evansville began its President's Cup title defense by going on the road and beating Birmingham in a shootout. And then Peoria defeated Quad City as those 2 teams opened the season against one another. So now Knoxville trying to bounce back from a opening weekend loss. And I thought we kind of saw something that we've seen a lot of from Fayetteville when playing at Crown Coliseum, clogging up the middle defensively, not letting a ton of shots getting through, and then making it very difficult for teams to set up on the perimeter within the offensive zone and try to make something happen offensively. I thought Knoxville did a great job forechecking. I thought Knoxville did a great job back checking. It really just came down to the way that Fayetteville recovered in its own zone. Only 22 shots on goal for Knoxville in that game. Had some other chances where they missed the net and not a ton of grade A opportunities to really test Colby Muse, but I thought the Ice Bears did a pretty good job in a lot of other facets of the game. Game wasn't overly tense. Saw a couple of fights. I thought those fights were pretty textbook. I thought the incident with Ryan Kuzmich and John Ayanzo was kind of a matter of Ayanzo wants to go after Jimmy Soper. Kuzmich says, "You're not touching my captain." They have a quick fight, go to the box. Kind of the end of that. Didn't really see that persist much the rest of the game. Robin Lilliquist makes a clean hit on Tim Kent. John Monkovich not happy about it, so he makes the challenge. Lilliquist accepts, and then they fight, and that's kind of the end of it. So, didn't see anything overly controversial. Knoxville didn't get a power play in this game, and I think that really just kind of had a lot to do with referee Mark Dungan kind of letting him play and letting things go from time to time. And so I think all in all, it was kind of a matter of just, the things played out the way that they did. I thought Knoxville really tried to work the perimeter a lot, just had trouble getting to the net front, had some really good looks late to try to tie that game. Davide Gaeta had a decent look from the high slot. Braden Stannard with a really good opportunity late in the third period where he made a nice move to create some space right in front of the net and was just unable to put the puck home. And so I think when you look at how Knoxville is going to respond moving forward, it's okay. You obviously want to get the offense going. Do you need to play a little bit more physical to try to draw more penalties? And here's that look from Braden Stannard. Nice move to get around the defenseman. Muse makes a good stop. It's bouncing along the goal line, and then Fayetteville's able to clear. And that's really the closest that Knoxville got over the last couple of minutes to tying that game. And then time just kind of ran out on the Ice Bears. But I do kind of wonder, do you see more physicality? Obviously, Knoxville's got the size and the strength to be able to make that sort of challenge. You have guys that first line that was playing, Jimmy Soper, Ryan Kuzmich, Braden Stannard, those guys are willing to dig pucks out of the corners and they're willing to play along the wall and get to the net front. They're not afraid to be physical. You throw in a couple of guys like Robin Lilliquist on the back end, Paxton LaRue, who rotates in out on the perimeter, is not afraid to be able to use his body when he has to. Eric Olson got into a fight during the preseason game, as did Can Toby. So there's a lot that could take place in a game like this. It takes a little bit of a different look with Bryce Martin not being in the lineup for Roanoke. He's going to be suspended for 2 games due to an unpenalized slashing penalty against Huntsville's Cole Reginato. We're going to talk about that with Mitch Stewart more in the podcast in the next segment. But obviously, suspension early on in the season, so Martin is going to miss both games this weekend. He'll be available to return next Friday when those 2 teams come back to Knoxville on Halloween. So we'll talk to Mitch Stewart about the start of the season, what the last 6 months have been like for Roanoke as they try to rebuild from last year, losing some key pieces, but also making some very intriguing offseason acquisitions, especially a couple that I think got the Roanoke fan base very excited. So we'll talk to Mitch about all that as we get ready to wrap up on the other side. Joel Silverberg here on the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. Again, the podcast is brought to you by Wings Etc. right there on Level Road. Good food, great times await at Wings Etc. So please support the new sponsor of the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast, our friends at Wings Etc. right outside of Turkey Creek, right off the interstate if you're headed out west towards West Knoxville. Joel Silverberg here with you. Mitch Stewart, the voice of the Rail Yard Dogs, coming up next right here on the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast.
You're listening to the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast, sponsored by Wings Etc. Good food and great times await at Wings Etc.
Continuing on with the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. Again, my name's Joel Silverberg, the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast brought to you by Wings Etc. We appreciate you tuning in, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And continuing on, Knoxville looks ahead to Roanoke this Friday and Saturday, and then the following Friday. So 3 games between two teams that see each other a whole lot. Only 10 meetings between these two teams this year after facing each other 11 times each of the last 2 seasons, and then 14 times the year before that. And so to help preview the Rail Yard Dogs, we bring on the voice of the Roanoke Rail Yard Dogs, Mitch Stewart. Mitch, really appreciate the time as always. And let's kind of go back a little bit. What have the past 6 months been like for the Rail Yard Dogs organization? Finished in 3rd during the regular season last year. Phenomenal team going into the postseason. End up getting knocked out in the first round. And a lot of familiar faces coming back this year, but also some key pieces that are gone from last year's team. What has this just been like for Dan Bremner and that group over the last 6 months or so?
Yeah, it's an interesting spot to be at for the franchise, where you're kind of looking back a little bit at the history of the team. Of course, this is the 10th season since hockey's return here to the Star City, and that's been something that we've really been keying on as an organization, that we've really been celebrating, and, not only internally here within the franchise, but throughout the community, and how we're kind of trying to push ourselves out there early on in the season for fans that may not be familiar with the Rail Yard Dogs. But a big era of transition as far as moving forward too, and looking forward. You mentioned last year the regular season success, and you set a franchise record for wins in the regular season. You end up second in attendance in the league. You have a lot of players that were either up for conversations for awards or that won awards. And unfortunately, they meet up against your Ice Bears, and they're not able to get the job done in the postseason. I think that always kind of leaves a bit of a bitter taste in the mouths at the end of the season, especially someone like Dan Bremner, who sees that ultimate goal as winning a championship every year, even if it may not be super realistic to win it every single season that he goes into it. I think he felt like he had a group last year that could get it done, or at least be right there at the end and contending. So you look at some of the changes throughout this offseason, whether it be the personnel on the ice, some of the moves within the staff, both in the front office and with the hockey operations. And there's a lot of new faces that are stepping in. And fortunately, like you mentioned, there are still people like Matt O'Day and Austin Rodebush, CJ Valerian, people that have not only been around the pro ranks, but have been around here in the Star City. They know what Dan Bremner has expected of them, what the standards are, and what he views for this team as far as that ultimate goal, and what he thinks is success. So it's really exciting to have a lot of these new faces in, and to maybe kind of turn the page on a new chapter here for the Rail Yard Dogs in the Star City. And hopefully it'll come together here soon, and they can have another strong year like they did a year ago.
And you mentioned Matt O'Day, Austin Rodebush, a couple of key pieces that are back this season, but Mac Jansen opts to head to the FPHL. Nick Ford, Tommy Municello, they're overseas. What is kind of the leadership? How's that been impacted? And what do you miss with guys like that no longer being with the team?
Yeah, I mean, if you look up and down, it's the top 5 point producers and 6 out of the top 7 from last season that are not back for Roanoke. And I think that probably raises a lot of eyebrows for folks, not only here within the Star City that cheer for the Rail Yard Dogs, but around the SPHL, as far as, okay, well, who's going to put the puck in the net this year? Who's going to be the big time producers for the Rail Yard Dogs? And I think the one thing that Roanoke was really able to lean on in these past couple of seasons, when you get into those grueling days of the middle of the season, and maybe you're not at 100%, or you've put together a couple of lackluster performances in a row, it's that you have that experience. You have guys that not only have performed at a high level in this league for season after season after season, but they've gotten it done in the playoffs too, whether it was the back-to-back finals appearances, winning the President's Cup in 2023, coming really close to getting back to the final there in 2024. That type of experience is so valuable. You can't really place an exact number on it with someone like Mac Jansen or Nick Ford or even Tommy Municello these past couple of seasons. Steven Alva was here and won a President's Cup with the Rail Yard Dogs, and I'm sure there's a couple other names that I'm leaving out here too. Brendan Pepe had been around for a long time, a former SPHL Defenseman of the Year. So I think it does put a little bit of a strain on some of these returners, just as far as, hey, we got to kind of pick up the slack from some of these players that have been next to us and leading the ship. But it also gives a really unique opportunity for some players that, whether they were here for their first year last year, maybe are in their first full professional seasons now, or some of the guys that were brought in last year that came from elsewhere, whether someone like Joe Widmar, who has been in a lot of different stops and understands how to make it through a professional season and really take care of his body and lead by example in that way. Andrew Harley and Tim Manning, Ryan Reef are some of these holdovers from last year's squad, where now these newcomers that are coming fresh into Roanoke that don't know, maybe left from right from Dan Brimner's systems or Dan Brimner's expectations, they could show them the ropes just as well as an O'Day or a Valerian or a Rotabush, so on and so forth. So, I do think it adds a little bit to that pressure on those guys that would maybe be that expected leadership group. I think the ones that we just mentioned, O'Day, Valerian, Rotabush, throw Bryce Martin in there, could throw Travis Broman in there from the time that he had spent in Roanoke in the past, and then now being in the ECHL for the last 2.5 seasons before coming back to Roanoke. It's a really interesting blend because, again, you still have some holdovers that are very recent. You have people like Broman or even Brody Clays who have been here before. They know what to expect. And then you have some of these other players that got a little bit of a taste of it last year when that big core group was still mainly intact. And now that it isn't necessarily, or that it looks a little bit differently, it kind of pushes them to come out of their shell and to step it up a notch too. And so I think it leaves a pretty good recipe as long as everyone understands what's at stake and what they need to do to do their job and perform their role, however different that might be this season from years past.
What did you think about Friday's game? You open up the season at home against Huntsville. Huntsville kind of in a similar boat as Roanoke this season. Some pieces missing, but some really good additions this year. Travis Broman was, one of the big highlights for Roanoke. Josh Kessner, that signing got a lot of attention for Huntsville fans. Some similarities there, both teams with a lot of returners. What did you think about the season opener on Friday?
Yeah, I think from Roanoke's perspective, the first two periods were pretty darn strong. The first period, as you'd expect on an opening night, both teams are kind of feeling each other out. Huntsville had a really pretty power play goal that they were able to get on the board with in the first period, where they work it down to the bumper and find the man right inside the penalty killers, that soft spot of the Roanoke PK unit. And in the second period, I think with just the amount of physicality that built up on both sides already early on in that game, and the second, it felt like Huntsville kind of took their eye off the puck a little bit, that they got a little bit out of their game. That's something we've seen in the past in this matchup with Roanoke and Huntsville, where over the past few years, Roanoke tends to be a bit more physical by nature than Huntsville is. And Roanoke's had a lot of success against Huntsville, whether it's been because they can beat up on them a little bit, push them around a little bit, or because when Huntsville tries to respond and match that type of game and match that type of energy, it gets them a little bit out of their comfort zone. I think it's what you saw in the second period, where Roanoke gets a slew of power play chances. It really got their confidence going. They're able to get a couple of goals and take the lead. Had a couple of chances late on in that second period to extend that lead, whether it's the 5-on-3 where Dan Bremner calls the timeout. You get about 90 seconds on that two-man advantage and aren't quite able to capitalize. There was two breakaway chances late in the second, too, that it felt like Roanoke had pretty good opportunities, grade A opportunities to extend that lead to 2. You get into the third period, and I think it's so common in this league the first couple of weeks, no matter what team it is, no matter what your training camp looked like or how many bodies you have, that fatigue starts to settle in, because even if you're training and you're skating all summer, it's a little bit different from the adrenaline and everything that goes into the game flow of that first game. And both teams were pretty sloppy, I thought, in the first 10 minutes compared to the first 40. And Huntsville really got that second wind about the under 10 media timeout, took over the game from that point on. Coming into the season, I think just looking up and down the rosters in the SPHL, a lot of people that are familiar with these teams would probably have had Huntsville towards the top as far as what the roster looked like on paper. Of course, you have to go out and prove it on a given Friday or Saturday night. But for Roanoke, it felt like a lot of their mistakes, a lot of the things that they came up short with are long-term fixable, even short-term fixable when they get back to watching the film from Friday and preparing for this weekend series with the Ice Bears. But a lot of promise. A lot of those newcomers, the new names that aren't familiar to Roanoke fans, became very familiar very, very quickly. I'm sure we'll have time to maybe talk about a couple of them. And as far as the returning faces, some players that you would hope would step up, they were well involved too and getting into the action. So I think the big takeaway is that this is not going to necessarily be a rebuild year for Roanoke. I kept hearing that a lot this summer from fans I'd see around town or other SBHL fans that would maybe reach out from time to time. If you know Dan Bremner, that's not his MO. He's not looking at this as a year to try and find some new faces to add to the core. He wants to get right back to where Roanoke's been the last couple of years and contending for a championship. I think that Friday showed that they're going to have the potential with this group. They're going to have talent to be really competitive with anyone and everyone in the league. It's just as far as finding that consistency, ironing out some of these mistakes that you maybe saw in that first game on Friday night, and they'll get a good opportunity to here in the next couple of weeks with some tough competition.
And looking back at that game as well, so you mentioned it being a physical game. Definitely got tense at times, a lot of penalty minutes piling up. The incident in the third period with Bryce Martin and Cole Reginato, what did you kind of see? I know you and I have talked off the air a little bit. It seemed like there was some stuff during that shift that kind of led up to it. Obviously, these are two players that, you know, tensions can rise, especially when these two come together. Cole Reginato is obviously a very tough player for Huntsville. Bryce Martin is not going to shy away from a fight for Roanoke, and so the two come together. And for fans that don't know, the camera angle at Roanoke, you're quite a ways to the left of that angle, so you probably actually had a better angle of the initial hit, the initial contact, than the viewers do watching on Flow Hockey, and then the away broadcaster is actually down at the other end. So you might have had a better angle at it. What did you see on the initial contact, and as everything kind of escalated up to that point?
Yeah, I really didn't get a good look at it, a super great look at it until the replay, because you're still following the puck, you're trying to follow the play, you see that something's happening, and by the time I caught up to it live, I hadn't seen the slash from Bryce that had happened after their initial contact there in front of the net. So I think from talking to Bryce and a couple of the players, maybe there was a bit of initial animosity, that super quick reaction you see from Bryce, where he didn't really like the way that he got hit by Reginato in that sequence. And, from there, he there's no other way to say it. He loses his composure a little bit, unfortunately, and he takes a swing at Reginato from behind and jumps after him. And you did a good job of kind of setting the stage. These are two guys that, again, they're not afraid to use their body. They're not afraid to play physical, and they're not afraid to maybe drop the mitts if that's what they see is the fit or the right place for that situation. And I imagine that Bryce, whether it wasn't intentional or not from Reginato, you can't really tell what the point of contact was when they come together there. Whatever it was, he probably saw 7-8, and he's already got a preconceived notion of where that contact was coming from and what it meant. And unfortunately, he didn't quite deal with it in a way that was going to keep him on the ice on Friday night, and again this weekend in a big rivalry matchup with the Ice Bears. So I imagine that Dan has had a talk with him, and as far as his role within this team and the leadership and that defenseman group, and he's a very important player to the rail yard Dogs, and it's important to have him out on the ice. Roanoke right now, they've only got 5 defensemen available coming into Friday and Saturday's game against Knoxville. So as I understand it, there's probably going to be someone that gets moved back from the forward group and is playing as that 6th defenseman throughout this weekend. And you hope for Roanoke it could be something where you can use it as a learning tool for some of these other players coming in. The flip side of it is it kind of sets a tone on the first game that Roanoke's not going to be someone that gets pushed around or messed with. That may be the one positive caveat from a sequence like that, is it sends a pretty clear message that Bryce Martin is still Bryce Martin. He's still got that chip on his shoulder, and whether you do it to him or someone against the Dawgs, this team is coming with a bit more attitude this year and a bit more physicality. That's been the name of the game from Dan Bremner all throughout the preseason, is that he wants physical, gritty Dawgs hockey back the way that it had been for quite some time here in the Star City. So I think that may be the one takeaway, the one way that I can maybe spin it a little bit for you as far as a good takeaway from it. But overall, it's early in the season. There's a lot of emotions that come in opening night into that game and getting ready for the season. So hopefully Roanoke can respond from it this weekend, even without Martin in the lineup. And after he serves his suspension, hopefully he can slot back in and do what a lot of Roanoke fans expect him to do on a given night.
What's the anticipation like for the next 3 games being against Knoxville? Whenever you face the team that eliminated you in the postseason the year before, what is that kind of like? What's been the atmosphere and the vibe leading up to this weekend and then next Friday? And what do you kind of expect to see from an X's and O's standpoint as these two teams come together for the first time this season?
Yeah, it's funny. You kind of mentioned earlier we were talking about how the last 6 months has felt and it maybe being a bit of a point of transition. This rivalry has had a couple of points of transition in my time here now going into year 5, where that first season I come in and Knoxville is dominant. They have the most wins in SPHL history in the regular season and have beaten up on Roanoke a good bit. And the Dogs end up knocking Knoxville out of the playoffs that year in the first round en route to the President's Cup final. And from then on, it's really been Roanoke's rivalry. They've dominated the last couple of season series and have been the stronger team year in and year out in the regular season standings, at least, apart from just the head-to-head stuff. And you go into that series last year, and Roanoke had won 9 out of the 11 games. And you go to Knoxville and win game 1. You had the best home record in the league, and it was pretty deflating, I think, for not only the players and people around the room, but I don't think a lot of people expected that here in the Star City that were pulling up and root for the Dogs on those games 2 and 3 at Berglund Center last April. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see from the guys that are holdovers that were on that team last year that at least can understand the importance, the heat of the rivalry, to see how they respond and how they step into it. Of course, I know that Martin was probably going to play a big role in that too, with how he's been here with the Rail Yard Dogs through a lot of those memorable moments between Roanoke and Knoxville over the past few years. But it's a chance on the flip side for Knoxville to start wrestling back control of this rivalry again, the way that it was in Roanoke's earlier years in the SPHL. You have an opportunity to really start off on the right foot with 3 games in a row against the Rail Yard Dogs, starting with 2 of them at home here these next 2 weekends. So I'm excited to see what it looks like. Again, we've had the pleasure of seeing a lot of very interesting moments for good, bad, or indifferent between these two squads over the past couple of years. But it's always a really entertaining matchup night in and night out for these teams when they match up throughout the year. And of course, these 3 will kick off a whole slew of matchups between Roanoke and Knoxville throughout this season. So I'm excited to see how these two teams stack up this weekend.
Yeah, 4-16-2. Knoxville's record against Roanoke in the regular season over the last 2 seasons. Keep in mind they went 6-8 the year before and 5-2 the year before that. So it has definitely turned in Roanoke's favor over the last 4 seasons, but a new season begins. Both teams trying to bounce back from season opening losses, and the 2 teams will commence for the first of 10 meetings this season, starting on Friday right here at the Knoxville Civic Coliseum at 7:30. If you're watching on Flow Hockey, you can hear Mitch Stewart, the voice of the Rail Yard Dogs, on the away feed, and as well as the Rail Yard Dogs Mixler channel as well. So multiple ways to be able to catch the voice of the Rail Yard Dogs, and we certainly appreciate Mitch for taking some time to join the podcast. Mitch, thank you so much. Good to talk to you again. Look forward to seeing you on Friday.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. Looking forward to getting back to it. We'll see you this weekend.
You're listening to the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast, sponsored by Wings Etc. Good food and great times await at Wings Etc.
Really appreciate Mitch Stewart, the voice of the Roanoke Rail Yard Dogs, for joining us on the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. Again, if you're watching on Flow Hockey, you can hear Mitch on the away feed. You'll be able to hear myself on the home side. And then if you're wanting to hear the Knoxville Ice Bears flagship radio station, 93.7 WVLZ, you can listen on the 93.7 website. That's 937WVLZ.com, or on the 93.7 WVLZ mobile app, or the Knoxville Ice Bears Game Day mobile app, which you can download for free on your smartphone, and just hit the Listen Live tab, and it'll take you straight to the WVLZ media player. And of course, if you've got an FM radio, just tune in to 93.7 FM, and that's WVLZ, and you'll be able to hear the call. Our broadcast, of course, this season is brought to you by UT Federal Credit Union, and the Ice Bears will bring you home game against the Roanoke Rail Yard Dogs on UTFCU home ice here at the Knoxville Civic Coliseum. So we'll have the call for you at 7:30 as the Ice Bears take on the Rail Yard Dogs, and then we'll be back at the Berglund Center in Virginia on Saturday for a 7:05 puck drop. Joel Silverberg here for the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Once again, our podcast is brought to you by Wings, Etc., right there on Level Road outside Turkey Creek. Great wings. They've got great burgers there too. So wings are in the name. They do a lot of other things really well. Love the onion rings, the curly fries, the tater tots. They've got a lot of great options there for the whole family. And of course, great place to have a cold one and take in the game. Their pub environment is filled with TVs, whether it be out in the dining room area or over by the sports bar. Be sure to check out Wings, Etc. at some point this season, and be sure to thank them for sponsoring the Knoxville Ice Bears. Again, we'll have a call for you, 93.7 WVLZ and on Flow Hockey, courtesy of Flow Sports, the official broadcast partner of the SPHL. I'm Joel Silverberg. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Knoxville Ice Bears podcast.